Hello, my name is Bob Hampson. I live on the hills just outside Marburg with my wife Narelle. We've lived here for about 20 years and we bought this 60-acre block that we live on now as a very much rundown piece of land. It was totally covered, totally covered in lantana and boxthorn principally, with lots of other weeds as well. There were groundsel trees on it with a diameter of 400 or 450 mils. They were huge trees. So we purchased that with an old house on the property. And we have developed this into a block that we are very proud of and we love showing off to other people. In fact, we've had over 3,000 visitors to the property since we've been here, mostly students. And we've talked about everything from revegetation to property management planning to weed control, pasture management, all of those sorts of things. I've been asked today to talk about changes to the landscape, and if we look over my shoulder, this is the view from our veranda, and we're looking east towards Ipswich and to Brisbane Forest Park. So we sit on this veranda for most of our meals, in fact, and we notice changes in the landscape over the long term and certainly over the short term. In the longer term, what we have noticed is more denser settlement. So at night time in particular, there are far more lights in our vision than there were when we came. I don't think there's any more or less trees in the landscape than when we first came here. There's more trees in some parts and less trees in others, but overall I think there may be even a few more trees than in the past. So I've been a member of West Moreton Landcare for the whole of the time that we've been here, so over 20 years. And the principal function of West Moreton Landcare is education. Education of our members and education of the local community. And the education is about how to better care for their land. So that's probably the most enjoyable thing for me about being a member of Landcare is interacting with landholders to help them better manage their land. So let's go back to changing landscapes. So I've talked about the broad landscape, and the major change at the broad landscape is denser population, denser housing. Even though this is zoned rural, there are still more houses, more people living here. But what we might do now is go out into the paddock and have a look at changes to my landscape. Of course, I can only describe some of them to you today because I've talked about when we came here, the property was very much overgrown with weeds, woody weeds, and now we don't have a weed problem at all. But we can see some of the issues that I'm dealing with today. And of course, the other thing to remember is this is being recorded at the end of August, at the end of winter, after 2 very dry years. So we've had a dry winter, a dry summer, and what we'll see is lots of brown grass, not lush green grass. So that's a point to remember when looking at, when interpreting what we're about to look at. Our block is all about lifestyle. We live here because we like the site. We live on a high block, and we have plenty of land around us. So we have no close neighbours. Now, if we have 60 acres, 25 hectares, if you have that much land, then you're going to have grass growing, because these are very fertile soils. So when we get rain in summer, hopefully most years, the grass really explodes, really grows quickly. In fact, I say to my friends that one of my favourite things to do is to go and sit quietly in the grass and listen to it growing, because it grows very quickly when we get the right conditions. Now, because we have all that grass, if I don't do something to manage it, there will be a grass fire hazard in spring. So I graze cattle, I run cattle on the place to manage the pastures, manage the grass. So in my head, my philosophy is I don't graze cattle, I manage pastures. Now what I'm standing in now is an area that's been grazed fairly recently by cattle. The grass is mostly Angleton grass. Angleton grass is fairly productive, but it goes to seed, runs to seed very quickly in early autumn. So it must be grazed down before early autumn, otherwise the cattle won't eat it. I never graze my pastures any more than this. This is as far as it goes, because when we do get rain, I don't want to see any runoff. I want to see the water going in rather than running off. And if it does run off, I want it to be clear, because if it's not clear, it's taking away some of my topsoil into the creeks, into the Brisbane River, and ultimately down to Mount Crosby, where it must be removed for Brisbane's drinking supply. And if it overtops the Mount Crosby weir, then it runs out to Moreton Bay and causes all sorts of problems in Moreton Bay. So I'm very much aware that in managing my place, I'm managing part of the catchment for the Brisbane or South East Queensland water supply. And everything that I do here has some impact, albeit quite small. Just in the last 12 or so months, we've started to see a condition called Pasture Dieback come into the district. It's on many properties around the district. And we'll walk now to a site that's got Pasture Dieback on it. I've got small patches of it on my place. And I don't know what the future is for it. I don't know whether it's going to expand. We've got scientists working on it. There are millions of dollars each year being spent on this problem, which is affecting much of southern Queensland. But this is the first time I've had it on my place. So let's now go and have a look at small areas, fortunately, of Pasture Dieback on my property. So here's an area that's bare of grass. There are weeds growing here, broadleaf weeds, and there are some pasture legumes. This is one of the verbenas, a weed, and this little plant here is Phasey bean, an introduced pasture legume. So Pasture Dieback affects grass species. It doesn't affect broadleaf species. And whilst I'm sad that it's here, I'm sorry that it's here, I don't like to see it here, I'm looking forward to seeing what I can do to ameliorate this condition. So what I will be doing here is throwing some legume seed, mixed legume seed, into these areas, and just seeing what happens. I expect that the legume will do well, because even now in this dry, as I pointed out a moment ago, we've got these Phasey beans, that the plants that the cattle have grazed. And the other legume that does very well here, and there's none I can see just around here, is Soratro. Soratro is a creeping legume, and there are places where I had a little bit of dieback last year that's almost pure Soratro now. So this is how the landscape continues to change for me. I always see great pastures and trees as a work in progress. It's never finished, it's always changing. And I never know what weed problems I'm going to have on the property. It depends. Each year I get a different suite of weeds depending on my previous management, and in particular when the rain falls. So this year we had no summer rain, but we had rain in March, and the weeds I had in March were quite different to what I've had in previous years. I always find that very interesting, because you never know what nature's going to bring you. But I hope we can get on top of this Pasture Dieback problem. Our 60 acres is roughly divided into two by this gully that we're now standing in. This gully, though now dry, carries very large volumes of fast-flowing water when we get heavy rainfall, as in 2008, 11 and 13. In fact, the water would be over my head where I'm standing now, but only for a short period of time. Now, when we came here, as I mentioned in 1999, this was just wall-to-wall lantana in here. We couldn't walk through here. I cut my way through here with a brush hook, in fact. And it was my intention, my goal was always to plant trees here. And so what I've done is revegetated this gully back to the what might have been the original rainforest that was here. We're in an area that was originally forested in dry rainforest. And one of the, also called softwood vine scrub. It's called softwood vine scrub because the emergent species in the scrub was these trees that are on both sides of me now, hoop pine. So they're indigenous to this species, to this area, and they're a softwood, so softwood vine scrub. So what I've done with this section of the gully here is to revegetate it back to the species which are likely to have been here or might have been here pre-European days. This area here is an area, just a little clump of hoop pines, and further down the gully as we go down through there I have many other species of the vine forest. I have the area fenced out, that is fenced to exclude livestock from it, and this area through the middle here I slash so that it's my garden basically. It's where it's where I come to get away from the world, so to speak. Again, I don't slash it all the time. I don't slash it down so that there's never anything here, so you can see grass in front of me and longer grass behind me. And that's because I like to have a ground cover for water if it comes, and hopefully it comes before Christmas. The trees on both sides of me are about, they're approaching 20 years old. There's some tube stock that I had left over from another planting, and I'm really quite pleased about how well they've done here. I have them, it's almost a monoculture of hoop pines where I'm standing now, except for some crow's ash, which I also planted with them. But further down the gully, I've got a much bigger range of species. I learnt lots of lessons in this when I was doing this, because the banks of this gully are quite steep, much steeper than this in places. So I learnt that Roundup, glyphosate, is very handy, but it can also be very dangerous. In fact, I ended up telling people that to beware of glyphosate. It causes erosion. It causes erosion because it kills everything on the surface. There's nothing growing here. Originally, when I first started planting this, I kept it clean with glyphosate. And the first decent rain we got, I had a lot of erosion. Just nothing severe, but a lot of surface erosion. So the water that ran down the gully was very muddy, and as I said before, we don't like muddy water running off this place. So I then stopped using glyphosate and allowed weeds to grow. And the most prolific weed that grew here was cobbler's pegs, otherwise known, sometimes known as farmer's friend. And I came to regard it as a friend because it has a very fibrous root system, and it held the topsoil together. And I controlled the growth of the cobbler's pegs with a brush cutter. So I'd come down here and almost treat it as a lawn. I'd come in, and it never let it get more than 6 inches high. There is nothing growing here now, no weeds or anything, because we have several inches of thick leaf litter here now. Some of that is from the hoop pines, and the other is from this species growing here, which is called Melotus, or red kamala is its common name, red kamala or Melotus philippensis. It's one of the pioneer species in the rainforest, in the dry rainforest. And you can see there's quite a thicket of it just there. It comes up everywhere, and in fact I control that with my chainsaw because it just gets too thick. But in dry times like we have now, like most of the dry rainforest species, it protects itself, or its survival technique is to defoliate itself, is to drop a lot of leaf. So we get a lot of leaf litter from the red kamala. It's a friend, a great friend. One of the things that I find when I'm working down here in the gully is that there are quite different animals live down here than live out in the paddocks, out in the grassed paddocks. So this is a favourite refuge for redneck wallabies. It is common for me to be working down here and have a sense that there's someone behind me, and turn around and I'm being observed by a redneck wallaby. There's a whole lot of different bird species down here, and certainly a whole lot of different butterfly species that flutter around in the warmer months. So this is quite a different ecosystem with its own microclimate that we've created here on the place through changing it from lantana to revegetating it back to the dry rainforest. And I've got to remember that I could be anywhere. I could be anywhere in Queensland, but I'm standing here. I can't hear a car. I can hear birds singing. I can see butterflies, and yet I'm only 50 minutes from Lang Park. So this is a special part of the world, just here. Now what we see here is an example of grazing on the landscape. On my side of the fence, it's grazed I graze it very conservatively. The grass that we're looking at is mostly green panic. And remember, this is August, so it's at the worst time of the year for it. This is my boundary fence, and you can see the effect of overgrazing over the fence. I can see very little perennial grass over there, indeed I can see very little vegetation at all. So we must always be aware of the effect of animals on the landscape, and we should use animals, I believe, as a management tool in the landscape, and that's very obvious here on either side of the fence. So we're now standing amongst the other species of plantation tree that I have here, and this one is called Western white gum or chinchilla white gum. Originally it grew only in a very small geographical area around Chinchilla on the cracking clay soils. Its scientific name refers to the very white or silver bark. So in the morning when the sun's shining on it, and late afternoon when the sun's shining on it, it's just lovely. Planting them here was the first time that they'd been grown east of the range, the dividing range, and I've been very happy with them, very happy. They've grown well, and they produce very durable, long-lasting timber. My last thinning of these 2 years ago, when I reduced these down to about 150 trees per hectare, was a commercial thinning. That is, the thinnings were sold, and they have ended up as a pile field in the upper Worrell Creek as an aid to slowing down the bank erosion in that creek. If you look over the gully on the other side, we see a whole lot of hoop pines there. They were planted in 2008 and 2009, so they're about 11, 12 years old now. And my reason for planting them there was, well, firstly, hoop pines are indigenous to this species, to this area, but that area of soil over there was quite poor and eroded. We have 3 soil types on this, geological types on this property. In fact, I'm standing on the boundary now, so we have the very best of the soils, the good scrub soils, called the Walloon coal measures, and then we move to what the old timers called the bastard scrub soils, not quite as fertile, and they're on what we now know as the Kookendowie Formation. So the hoop pines are growing on Kookendowie Formation. Soil was, there was almost no topsoil there when I planted them, so there was almost no grass growing. It was useless for as far as production was concerned for grass, but it's good for growing trees. So those trees that we can see in the background are hoops. I maintain them as a proper plantation tree. That is, I prune them and I tend to them well. The good thing about them is that cattle won't eat them, or don't eat them. So you can plant them in your cattle pastures. So there's a tip. There's a tip for what tree do I plant in my pastures. Plant hoop pine, and you're planting an indigenous species, a species which is indigenous to here, or indeed even bunya pines, which are also prickly and the cattle won't eat. And whether they're indigenous to here is a matter that of discussion. It's likely that they did occur here originally. So there's 2 easy species to grow, easy to get from nurseries, or indeed grow from seed yourself. So we're now back down in the gully again, and we're standing in amongst the Kukendowie Formation. Now all of this whole area, the Marburg Range area, is underlaid by sedimentary rock, sandstone and siltstone. These are the poorer soils. They're also lighter soils, so they erode more. And I'm standing here on the bend in a gully. So the water runs through here very quickly, as I said before. It's likely to be up over my head here. And it runs down and hits this rock wall and swings around behind me. And it takes more and more of the rock wall away. That concerned me. So on the best hydrological advice that I could get, a simple way to assist in ameliorating this problem of the water scouring this bank out, was to put a little weir, which you can see just in front of me. So the rocks are from our local Mount Marrow quarry, and the weir is designed not to hold the water back, but rather to disturb the base flow, that is the flow at the base of the water column. So we're now standing in the community park at Marburg town, on the banks of the Black Snake Creek, which is just over here to my left. When I first came to this area about 20 years ago, this whole area that we're looking at now, all this area behind me, was just wasteland. It was weeds and rubbish. There were horses grazing in bits and pieces of it, but it was just wasteland. So here we are now 20 years later, and we have a path, a walkway, which provides a circular walk from the centre of Marburg right around through this parkland to past the showground and back into town. And we have a new planting. This planting is about 2.5 years old now. And this has been a Landcare project, a West Moreton Landcare project, where the local community has also been involved. So we've transformed this wasteland, rubbish land, into a very well used community asset now. The plantings that we see here were done only, as I said, about 2.5 years ago, and they were done by members of West Moreton Landcare and a group of Japanese university students who were here on an educational experience, and they came to Marburg for a day and planted all of these trees. And after that was a very hot November day, and the poor students didn't really know what had hit them that day. But then we went down to the local Anglican church, and they had lunch, and the ladies thought they had more than enough sandwiches, but they were well under-catered for. So what we've done here is to plant trees on this riparian land, that is land adjacent to the creek, that would have been here originally. So we've got blue gums and gum top box and she oaks predominantly, with a few other species mixed in. They've been planted very densely, but they'll sort themselves out. The more vigorous ones will take over. So this is an example of how our Landcare group, West Moreton Landcare, applied for funding from the state government, involved the community and an educational institution, and has achieved a great outcome for the community. So how can other landholders, and indeed general community people, townspeople, assist in building a more resilient landscape? Because our landscapes are under pressure from a whole lot of sources. I think the most important ingredient is passion, the desire to do something positive for the landscape. And if you have that passion, that will then drive you to seek out more information. The information may be about what the problem is. Is it a soil issue? Is it a management issue? What are the solutions? Seek out some information, and there's lots of sources of information. It's easy to do searches online, but council has great resources as well. The environment people in the council, the partnerships officers, the land for wildlife officers in council are a great source of information. If you become a member of Land for Wildlife, then you'll be invited to workshops and field days where you'll meet similar people with similar passion, and then that builds your passion, and you just keep on going and trying things. It's a matter of understanding nature and appreciating nature. What bird is that? Oh, what's my cat eating now? What's that animal my dog's chasing? Those sorts of issues are really important about making it a much better world for all of us. And then you go home at night with a warm feeling in the stomach, and for years afterwards look at the results of your endeavours. And of course, they're not always going to be successes. There will be failures. Some things won't work. Sometimes the environment won't work in your favour. We'll get dry periods. We'll get very wet periods. So the environment will not always work for you. So you've got to be prepared for some disappointment. It's not always upwards and onwards, but in the long run, it is upwards and onwards.